done with this, we'll have a chance for public input, and then we'll at least brainstorm a little bit on motions. If we get done earlier, that would be great. There is a college search going on here on campus at the same time as some of the trustees that are on the search committee are also here with us today. So we won't keep people any longer than we need to, but I think this information that we're about to hear from Tom will be important background information. So Tom Robbins.
That was very trusting, by the way, assuming it was going to be good, though.
Of course.
So as Jeff said, I'm going to do a high-level overview of the budget, and basically going to provide a brief overview of the FY 2016 budget challenges. And so I'll talk about the expenses and the revenues. So from the expense side, if we look at the FY 2015 projection, where we're going to end the year, and we add to that the 2016 inflation assumptions, we're going to be adding an extra $4 or $5 million of expense to the FY 2016 budget. And so if, by looking at where the salaries end the year at 15 and adding the contractual obligations for the unions and everything else and the health care benefits, it's going to be an extra $4 or $5 million. Of the operating costs we have, roughly 68% are employee costs, and that includes wages and TIA, CREFT, and healthcare and FICA. Roughly 5% of our operating costs are for utilities, 3% is for debt service. That's 67% of our costs generally are fixed, meaning in the near term we have no flexibility with them. The other 24% are not as fixed, but not a lot of flexibility there either. Those costs would be the scholarships and the lab supplies, the admission travel, janitorial supplies, and those types of issues. So on the revenue side, we have two sources of revenue. One is the state operating appropriation, and one is the tuition fee and room and board. Let's see if I can look sideways and make this work. Okay. So this is the picture chart we provide every year, and you can see that there's an inverse relationship between state operating appropriation and our tuition and fees. The less the state gives us for appropriation, the more we need to charge the students, and so that's a good example of what that looks like. Also, every year, the state gives us capital appropriation. It's about $1.4 million. When I started here about 13 years ago, it was $2 or $3 million a year. And we take that $1.4 million and we need to support over $500 million worth of buildings with that. That doesn't include infrastructure and that kind of stuff. So we're also undercapitalized on that side as well. As a result, we have to borrow money to do that, and that increases tuition as well. We have to borrow money to fix the buildings and build buildings. How do I do this roll down? All right, so this is a table that shows our tuition increases for the last 6 years, as you see, both in-state and out-of-state. Generally, the tuition increases have been about 4% a year, except for last year. And the tuition increase was 3%, and if the colleges want to increase the tuition any more, that had to be allocated for in-state financial aid. So this is a 5-year trend of our enrollments. You can see they're either declining or flat. Linden and Castleton have more out-of-state students than the other three, so they're sort of level and they're starting to decline as well at this point. I think it's worth noting that between 2008 and 2021, Vermont high schools see a 20% decline in graduates. And so I would suspect this is only going to get worse, and the significance of that is 84% of our students are Vermonters. And so as we continue to have declining high school seniors, and 84% are Vermonters, obviously we're going to continue to go down on that. This table is from a national survey, and it shows that the national average is on the right-hand column. And the middle column that shows the VSC is for our Vermont resident undergraduates. And you can see the national average we have always been under every year. And so although we think our tuitions are high across the nation, they've been higher. And we scroll it up a little more. You can see in the last 4 years, the table on the bottom, that the average 4-year increase has been 24%, whereas in Vermont, it was 14% over the last 4 years. And we were the 8th lowest in the nation. Same thing except for CCV. We're only a couple of years that CCV was higher than the national average, but again, if you look at the table on the bottom, the average 4-year increase nationally was 24% during that same time. CCV was 17%. So, again, under the national average. You can fit. Okay. All right, I'll just show you what this is much bigger, so we'll only concentrate on the top half, I guess. So what this chart does, there's 3 tables like this, and this basically shows the Vermont pricing for a Vermont student and the out-of-state pricing for a New Hampshire student, for example. So let's use Castleton, which is the top table. If you look the 3rd column in from the right, the Vermont in-state tuition, fees, room, and board for Castleton is $20,286 a year. So that's what a Vermont student would look to pay. If we look at in the same Castleton area, the King State College in New Hampshire, a New Hampshire student would have to pay $22,232. And so for me, what this says is that we are still priced pretty low. You know, a New Hampshire student would pay more in New Hampshire than a Vermont student would pay in Vermont. And if you look under the Castleton line at the UVM, the in-state tuition for UVM is $27,006 versus Castleton's $20,286. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. This is on the portal. We can share this with you if you want to look at it further. So this is the same logic, only this is an out-of-state student comparing their tuition fee with ours. And so again, if you look on the 3rd column from the right, the Castleton out-of-state tuition for a New Hampshire student would be roughly $35,000, and their in-state tuition would be roughly $22,000. And here is the final one that shows what a Vermonter would pay in-state versus out-of-state. And so using Castleton again, sorry Dave, in-state would be $20,286, and if the person decided, if the Vermont resident decided to go to Keene State, they would end up paying $30,152. And so we use this to understand how our pricing is relative to our competitors or the comparable colleges. So I was quick because Joe took all the time. So do you have any questions?
Hey, let me start, okay, Tom?
Sure.
I'll take the microphone here, and we'll get to the questions. I just had a few thoughts I wanted to share, and some of it's a reaction to this, but these comparables here, I just want to tell you what the takeaways for me are, and then I'm going to repeat a little bit what Tom said, but in-state to in-state, you know, we're pretty comparable with our neighbors to the east and the west. We're a little bit lower, this is for the 4-year institutions, a little bit lower than New Hampshire, a little bit higher than New York, but we're basically comparable. On the other hand, and this is not, I'm not taking into account the scholarship and the tuition discount, just the announced tuition here. If you look at what it costs a Vermont student to go out of state, then of course we're really competitive. And if we have decent quality programs, it's, you know, unless they really don't mind paying more, we have a good value here. Compared to our public counterparts, compared to our private counterparts, we're extremely competitive. And the other side of it is that, you know, for out-of-state students to want to come here, we're going to have like a heck of a program or some kind of
like assistance that that is going to attract them here. Like if it's something at Castleton or Johnson or the atmospheric program at Linden, something that really attracts them to want to come to Vermont, because it is expensive for students in out-of-state colleges if they're thinking of a public institution in New York or New Hampshire to instead come here, not including financial aid. I did want to make mention of that pincers chart, just one disclosure. It shows you how data can be, it is what it is. But we talked about earlier about the paradigm for the recent decades has been based on increased enrollment. And if tuition is the major driver and times the number of students, if you have increasing enrollment every year times tuition, it's naturally going to make the percentage that's coming from your state appropriation go down, even, you know, if the state was adding more money. So I'm just telling you, there's more to it than just looking at that straight line. It doesn't mean I'm not making any defenses for the state appropriation. My intention is to work with the higher education community to explain the impact of what some people will call the disinvestment, and that we need to reverse that trend starting this year. But I just wanted to point out there is more that impacts that graph than just a measly state appropriation. I also wanted to just say, look, when you look at some of this stuff, you know, you could get negative, but I'm not, and I want you to know that. And, you know, yeah, the pool of graduating high school students is going to continue to decline, but as opposed to with high school, where we have a law that you have to go to high school until you're 16, and then we graduate, compared to the rest of the country, very favorably, and we have a high graduation rate. We can do better at convincing Vermonters that post-secondary education is critical to their future, and the state college system, any one of them and all together, is the way that they can access post-secondary education that's going to impact their lives. So I actually think we do have room for improvement in terms of working together as a state to convert more of our high school graduates to pursuing post-secondary education. And if we do that right, that will help. And also, on, as it was mentioned earlier, on the retention end. And, you know, I think Joe Moore and others mentioned that, you know, you look at the retention numbers for the state college system as a whole, and we pick out different pieces, it's different for every one of them. We can do more there, and I'm very impressed with what I've seen in some of the efforts that are already taking place. So I know we're working hard on that now, and nothing happens overnight, but the combination of retention and recruitment can really meet some of the headwinds that we're facing from a demographic perspective. So I just wanted you to know, you can look at some of this stuff and get depressed. I don't. I see opportunities, and I'm looking forward to working with people. So with that, you know, turn it over for questions or comments from trustees or others. Joyce?
Joe,
Or you want, or Tom, if you want to ask me to respond.
yeah, I just wanted to reinforce what you said. I just was looking at some data a couple days ago, and right now Vermont, and this is.
Hang on 1 second, Joyce.
Oh.
Again, we're recording this, so for the people who are going to watch it later.
I just wanted to reinforce what Jeb said, and I do think there are lots of Vermonters who aren't going to college that should be, and that's our work, but it's hard work. The figures that really stuck out for me, and this is VSAC data, right now, Vermont, 52% of the students who graduate from high school are going on to college. But what's staggering is the difference between people who are on free and reduced lunch versus everybody else. And don't quote me on these exact figures, but it's around 65% of the people who are not on free and reduced lunch are going on to college. Only 35% of the students who are on free and reduced lunch are going on to college. So that's pretty significant, coupled with the number of students who are on free and reduced lunch is dramatically increasing. So there is a huge potential, but it's a harder to serve population.
Why don't we morph right here into in questions and public comment at the same time? Should we do that, everybody? I think the board is probably just okay with that. All right.
Hi, my name is Nasser Abdelfatah. I'm a senior here at Johnson State College studying environmental science with a minor in wellness and alternative medicine. I'm also a senator of Johnson State College Student Government Association, and I serve on the VSC Vermont State College Student Association board with Alyssa. My first just so you guys know, my question is for Jeb and for the members of the Board of Trustees concerning the tuition increase vote that you guys are having next month. One thing that I can proudly say that Johnson State College, two things Johnson State College has proudly taught me is, one, never be afraid to ask for help, and two, don't be afraid to ask despite what the answer is going to be. So I've been hearing all of you guys talk, and I've been hearing really great ideas. I've been hearing bits and pieces, and I'd also like part-time faculty member who had the courage to speak on student behalf just now is great, because I'm going to bring up the points that she just said. Talking to the students, seeing how there's only 4 in this room, they're all in class right now from 8:30 to 6:45. Just next time, if you want more students here, try that. Try a different time. But my comment for the vote is, last year you guys came to us with a 3%, with 3% for 2 years, and how the vote went down was 3% for 1 year. Next month, you guys are going to ask us, the students, the people who invest their time and money, to let the 3% happen again. And now what I'm going to ask you guys to do is, when you come back in February with your percent for 3%, I'm asking you guys, don't suggest 3%. Suggest the biggest possible percent. What number do you all need to succeed? What's it going to take for the college that is doing the worst? I don't mean to say it in a negative reflect, but sorry, Dan Smith. We need to help your college. How are we going to do that? Well, we need a percent. We need a percent that's not 3%. Clearly, we need something bigger than that. I want you guys to think about that when you come up and ask for how much money you want students to pay. Like we said earlier, it's a textbook. I'm an environmental science major. One textbook, that's nothing. So what's one textbook per student going to do? Probably not that much in the long run. Maybe ask for 2 or 3 more textbooks for students to pay for. They're not going to say no. They want to hear what your thoughts are. The next thing that you all need to recognize, or what students would like to see, again, I might be ignorant, my apologies, but if you're going to say you're going to do something, we're taught you're going to follow through with it. And if you don't, there's accountability. Whatever you guys suggest, whatever you guys do, the students want to see it in writing. They want to see that if you're going to raise it 3% with the condition that no one is going to be harmed, meaning no staff member is going to get fired or no one's going to get cutbacks down to 80%. That transparency, students are going to appreciate it. They're going to listen and they're going to respect you for it. Just because you want a big number, ask. We will agree. But we want to know, when we come in the fall, what are we going to look at? What's going to happen? Did that 3% save some people? Did it add a new program? We need to have words, some sort of contract between the presidents and the board that says, we're going to raise it this percent with the condition that this, and this is going to happen or not going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, there needs to be some sort of accountability. Someone needs to go through and say, you didn't listen to us, we have to do this. Again, I don't have all the creative ideas for punishments, but it necessarily wouldn't be a punishment. Maybe it'd just be something you need to work out. But I feel that if you want to raise tuition, go ahead, be ballsy, ask. But you need to ask in the most realistic way possible. And 3% every year, in my opinion, isn't going to cover it. And that's all I have to say.
Thanks. Well, great. I don't think those are bad questions at all. I don't have a microphone here. What do I do right here?
I thought those were great questions, and thank you very much, and I'm glad you had the courage to ask the questions, and I think it's great. I think the board is trying to make the best decision they can with the best information they have at hand, and unfortunately the world changes quickly, and things changed at many of the campuses between the time the decision was made last February and it got to be like around September and October of this fall. It's difficult to say in February, look, no matter what happens, even, we're making a projection, let's say we already heard that, the number of students, either by recruiting more or retaining more, that's the ballgame. The tuition increase, state appropriation, that's helpful, but it isn't enough to make up the difference for the numbers game. And if you have, you do your best to project on the numbers, and I think we need to be, in this regard, conservative on what we're not being rosy projections. But if the numbers don't come in, then you really have to take some action, because the colleges, the Vermont State colleges, don't have the kind of endowments that a Middlebury has in the state of Vermont. And when numbers go wrong, we don't have those kind of reserves. So I don't think it's going to be possible, I hate to say it, for a board to say, look, if we make a 3, 4, or 5% tuition decision, that we can guarantee that, no matter what happens in the world around us, we're not going to have to make any expenditure reductions. I think we can guarantee, if the projections come through and we're doing our best to be transparent about those, that this is what we expect to happen. And I hope we do that. I just wanted to note the board, I haven't heard anybody come up with a specific number on tuition. As far as what happened last year, as you know, I wasn't part of the team at that point. And I've heard different things about whether people thought there was some expectation in the second year or not. And I think there's legitimate, people heard things differently. In writing, it was a 1-year decision, not a 2-year decision. This year we're debating whether we ought to do a 1-year decision or a 2-year decision. I thought it was great on the panel that we had, some perspectives that shed some pros and cons about a 1 or a 2-year decision that personally I want to think about a little bit. As far as the number goes, I think you make a very good point. I mean, what's the difference between 3 and 4% if you really, need a higher percentage? And the difference is, there's 2 things. One, the board, I think at least some members of the board, and I'll speak for myself too, really do want to make sure that we don't put ourselves in an uncompetitive situation. So that's one. And 2, many members of the board, all of the members of the board, let me put it that way, I believe are sensitive to the amount of financial burden we're placing on our students. And, I think that drives them. It may not be the ultimate decision maker, but it's something they want to be careful about. So, we, certainly, the way the process works, as I understand it, is the chancellor will make a recommendation to the finance committee, and they will hash it out at the finance committee level. The finance committee will make a recommendation to the full board of trustees, and the board of trustees will make the ultimate decision. We do want it to happen. I want it to happen next month, because when I talk to folks at the campus level, and we heard it here today, in order for them to actually do the job they need to do, time is of the essence. And so we're hoping to make that decision. This is, as far as I know, the first time we've had one of these kind of advanced dialogues to make sure we're at least thinking about all the issues that are related to the tuition question. And hopefully it'll lead us to a good conclusion. And maybe we should look at a higher number. But I think people are doing their best to try to do the right thing in a world that's very, very rapidly changing. So thanks for your input. Anybody else? Well, we have a board member here. Okay, good.
I just want to thank you for your comments. It's interesting, having been on the board for about 5 years, that the student input goes back and forth. I mean, last year we heard pretty clearly from the Student Association, no increase. And I'm sure if you put a room full of Johnson students in this auditorium right now, you'd get some people standing up and saying, you're crazy to even suggest that. So I think that we understand that among the students, for some of them, $50 is a big, huge deal. And we've had disagreements at the board level of people voting for no tuition increase because they were hearing the students and didn't want to add anything more cost to students and parents. So I think as a group we're very sensitive to the range of opinion coming from students, and we wouldn't take your comments and say, oh, well, all the students just say do whatever it takes to provide a great education. We hear that balance. I think that your comments are really well appreciated.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Jeffrey Gateman. I was graduated by JSC last December. I'm continuing as a non-degree student here at JSC because of other circumstances. I agree with Nasser 100%. I think if you use just fictitious numbers, obviously at this point, if you ask for 200, what are we going to get? What are all the colleges dealing with? How does that work out over as an average? I say ask for 1,000. And that's a long conversation, even given the board members' additional comment. But here's something to think about that's it's a drastic example, but it parallels. In this state, there's a large heroin problem. Kids dying everywhere. And when a kid is on the down and out on the floor, like I've seen, and his muscles hurt, he's throwing up, if you only give him a nickel bag, his muscles feel better. But he's still throwing up. We need to fix what's wrong entirely at the VSC system for all the colleges so they can be, like Johnson should be in these other schools, cities on a hill. We should be places that are beacons where people are coming to. And these comparisons, I don't know if I can honestly compare. I love Johnson, and I could talk at length about how much, but you can't compare Johnson to Keene State. There's differences there, major differences. That's not comparable. So I agree with Nasser. We have to ask a member that's not just going to make us tread above water, but it's going to make us glow and grow and repair. Secondly, I'd like someone at some point to just enlighten me a little bit afterwards about who, out of the board and the chancellor and all this stuff, who looks for money in between tuition increases? Who's in charge of lobbying the state legislature, lobbying the IBMs, the Ben and Jerry's, yada, yada, yada? Who does that? And what have they done since they last asked students for money? Comparably, if you're against raising money against the 1%, you can understand like, oh, well, you can't just ask people just because we have an automatic funnel from the federal loans doesn't mean we should be the only resort. So we need to see that the team is working creatively to attract that money. And finally, I just have a comment about those graphs with the comparable numbers of 4% versus 11% and all that happy jazz. As I understand it, not being a true Vermonter, but as I understand from observing for the last year and a half and when I was here a number of years ago, there's a difference in cost of living, there's a difference of the average income, there's a difference of the state of affairs and people in this state versus the national average. And so there are some difficulties financially to balance against what I said to start off with, which is we should ask for what makes us glow, not just survive. But at the same time, like the board member just said, we do have to take all of it into consideration. So most importantly, out of what I said, I'd just like to know who goes for the money, who did, what did they do, what do we know?
Hey Jeffrey, thank you very much. This is the third day in a row I've gotten to listen to some of your wisdom and I really enjoyed it. And some of the other suggestions you made are still kicking around in the back of my head and I haven't forgotten them, so I've enjoyed that. You know, we actually, as I think Dan might have mentioned earlier, the board requested of the governor a $5 million increase this year. Frankly, it's not been received all that well, and I am spending considerable time trying to work on a proposal where we can get the legislature to increase money. I also, as a new chancellor, want to be as helpful as I can to the college presidents and their advancement and development teams in raising money outside of government. But I want you to know they're already doing that. As a matter of fact, since I'm on Johnson State College, I think I was super excited to meet the guy, and every time I ask what his name is, I forget it. But it's the START scholarship program you have here, where it's a foundation that basically allows kids to come to Johnson to study geology or something along those lines.
Less candidates, all the sciences.
All the science, it's a wonderful program. What, you're a STAR student?
Yeah.
It's wonderful. So there are some creative people out here at all the campuses that are out looking for other sources of money. And you know, and to the extent, and since I know I saw you sitting on a couple of the candidate discussions, with the ones that we've listened to so far, that's a big part of what they see as their jobs. I don't know where we'll end up on that. You know, we've got multiple candidates to go through. but we want to do everything we can to support. It's easier to raise money for a college, outside money, whether it's grants or individual donors or states, when they're actually helping support the colleges than it is a system. But as the chancellor, I want to do everything I can to support that kind of effort. So we're going to be trying as hard as we can on that. So that was number one. We all want to be, we want to be the shining light, the glow on the hill, and that's what we're all working to. But it's just as complicated as you know. Yes, in the back.
Hi, my name is Julie Thierrett. I'm a faculty member here at Johnson. First thing I want to say is I love Johnson students. They are awesome.
Awesome.
You spoke about the increase in tuition might make us uncompetitive, and we also should look at it the other way, that the lack of providing a quality education and experience at our colleges will also make us uncompetitive, and I think it will make us uncompetitive more quickly than increasing tuition would. As some of you know, the faculty have been working hard with the students and the staff as well at UVM and the Vermont State Colleges through passing of S40 and through the work of the Act 148 committee. And the results of that, we're not just looking at how do we get more money out of the general fund, because we all know that that's quite difficult, but where could we find these alternate revenue streams? And some creative ideas came out of that. I stood up in front of the board last year, I don't know quite when, but and talking about this same thing and saying, it's one thing for the students and the faculty and staff to come together and to be talking about this and to get the state to recognize that, they need to support us more, but also to try to be generating money elsewhere. But I think coming together with the presidents of the colleges and the Board of Trustees and the chancellor, we would be much more powerful together than we are apart. So my question for the board, and I guess Jeb mostly, is how do you see you as the new chancellor and the board going forward to perhaps help in this process that Act 148 and S40 sort of got started? Because I know the faculty, I'll speak for the faculty and then hopefully for the students, that we really feel like we could be much more powerful together, and we would really enjoy working together with the board and with you to kind of just really let the state know what we're doing, why what we're doing is important, and how can we get more support there.
Okay, well, great. So listen, I'm looking forward to working together, and hopefully we'll be successful. I also am looking forward to working together with our other partners in higher education. We do something different, and we have some advantages and things to offer that maybe some of the other public or private institutions don't have. But I actually think we will do better in terms of attracting support from the legislature and future governors by actually working together for post-secondary education as a whole. So that is one approach I do bring to this. It doesn't mean that we don't have to re-look at how we're strategically spending the money for post-secondary education to make sure we're getting the biggest bang for the buck. The Act 48 committee, it was disappointing to some people that put a lot of hard work into coming up with a proposal. The reality is, though, that it's just the reality that the majority of members of that committee were not comfortable with the recommendations. There were some recommendations in there that do make sense to me, that I'm looking forward to working with the faculty. You have to understand where I come from, and you can see the color of my hair. I've been around the block a couple of times, so I do take a little bit of a perspective of what can we really get done. And I heard it say, hey, sometimes you can't be afraid to ask, and I'm not afraid to ask, but I want to be making sure when I'm asking, I'm not just sort of going to get a stare that this, you're asking for something that's out of the range of reality. And to me, you know, I must say, I thought the idea that we would pin our future of funding for higher education on legalization of marijuana was not a smart idea. And I know some people did, but the majority of the people on that committee, in the end, just did not want to be associated with that. And there were some other things in there that they just felt like, despite our zeal for post-secondary education, that we probably would do our cause more harm than good by associating with that kind of a proposal. So, you know, were there things in there that I think are worth pursuing? Some people have heard me, and I'll say it right now. I think in this day and age, to send $4.5 million of hard-earned Vermont taxpayers to other states that don't have grant programs. I noticed I was looking at some NEBI information. It looks like New Hampshire has zeroed out their grant program, yet you can take your VSAC grants and go to schools in New Hampshire. That doesn't make sense to me unless they are offering a program we don't offer here in the state of Vermont. So there's some pieces like that, I won't go on, that are in that report that I'm hoping to work to explain to the board, make sure they're in sync, because after all, the chancellor works for the board. But I know we're all trying to do the same thing, and then we can work with the faculty and the other post-secondary, you know, the university and the Association of Vermont Independent Colleges. I mean, I don't know why it makes sense to them to have the money go out of state either. I don't think it does. But we've got some work to do to go over those, and I'm looking forward to working together with everybody so that we can, you know, actually not only increase the amount of money that's coming in, but making sure that we're spending the money that we're already spending in a way that meets the needs of Vermont students. So there we go on that one, okay?
Okay.
All right, good. Other questions? Bill? Bill and then Tim, yeah. Or comments or
Yeah, just to make a comment.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to. Looking for a music interlude there. I just wanted to mention as well, I had the opportunity to sit down with Jeb the other day, and while you've only been chancellor now for a few weeks, really. Yeah, which I can identify with. Some people asked me for some results in healthcare in Vermont. I've been the chair of the healthcare committee for a day and a half at that point. They had some very clear expectations of what I should have been able to accomplish. But Jeb has already taken an initiative to educate more legislators about the Vermont State Colleges, and I believe the number that I saw, I may be wrong, was that there are approximately 64 legislators whose districts include a campus or a site of one of the 5 state colleges, rather than just looking at, well, who are the legislators who happen to live in Johnson, who are the legislators who happen to live in Castleton. And I think that's the right way to look at it, to look at across the whole state and say, well, what about VTC in Williston? What about VTC in Brattleboro? And what about Community College of Vermont in Wilder, I think it is, and different places. And the reason that's important from my point of view is in terms of educating the legislature, legislators, and the legislature in general. I got to tell you, I've been there 20 years, and there was a point in time when I probably couldn't have told you what the 5 Vermont state colleges were, and I can guarantee you there are colleagues who can't tell me who the schools are that make up the Vermont state colleges. And outside the legislature, I absolutely guarantee you people do not know. So that I think one of our greatest challenges is to bring greater public awareness and appreciation of what the Vermont state colleges are providing to the state of Vermont. And not just to the state of Vermont generically, but to young people in the state of Vermont, to businesses in the state of Vermont, to communities in the state of Vermont. We, as I've said before, we're one of the best kept secrets in Vermont. You are one of the best kept secrets in Vermont, what the value that is brought to the state by the Vermont state colleges. So I just want people to know that there's already an initiative to help educate some of my colleagues. And I think that we need to do more of that more broadly. And I frankly think young people, young adults who are graduates or in the schools, it's not a matter just of the trustees doing that. I think there is a particular role for students and graduates of our institutions to have a voice in our communities about what it has meant to you. I mean, I heard several young, several, I say young, I'm old. I heard several students, or recent students say today, how much Johnson State College means to them. Those are the voices we need. We need to have people saying that as well. We need to have people hearing that. And lastly, just in terms of perspective, tomorrow's the budget adjustment on the floor of the House. We're cutting $12 million out of the state budget. And then we're starting the 2016 state budget, and we have to cut another $112 million out of the Vermont state budget. We passed a budget last year that we thought made sense, but we have to come back and adjust to the changing realities. So in terms of the request for a guarantee, we can't guarantee that. It would be irresponsible of us to say we make an absolute guarantee. We cannot do that at the state level. We cannot do that in our personal lives. What we can guarantee is that we will give it our best, honest, transparent effort, and then we will collaborate and make decisions together about how we make adjustments. And I think our Vermont legislature, frankly, is a good model of how we do that. For whatever some people think of the Vermont legislature or legislatures in general, I think it is actually a model of how we are accountable and prudent, and we always balance our budget.
Gary Moore in the back, so that was a wonderful.
Thank you very much for that wonderful statement.
I'd just like to follow up a little bit on what Bill said. Some of you have been around a long time have heard me say this.
And folks, if you came in the room and you didn't know it, because we introduced folks earlier, Bill Lippert is a legislative trustee. Gary Moore is a gubernatorial appointment trustee.
I know sometimes I sound like a broken record, but I strongly believe that this has to be a joint effort among all of us. And I challenge every single Vermont resident student at any one of our 5 colleges to contact their legislators. You are the ones, and there are only a couple of you in here right now, but it's the students who are being left with the debt load. It's the students who can speak directly to what the colleges mean to them and their future. Yes, the board needs to lobby, and in many cases that's been happening. But you are the people, the students, who are benefiting or not from the education, and it's you that they'll listen to far more than the rest of us, I believe.
Martha, chair of the board.
I really have nothing more to add from what Jeb said, Bill said, Gary, but I've spent 3 days here on Johnson campus during the search process. It's been enlightening, it's been wonderful. And if any group would like me to come back and meet with them, just give me a call. I would love to come up. I've been to the other campuses, and I think it's important. But you are the best recruitment tools that we have, whether it's the student, the faculty, wherever you go. Get out there and say, this is where I work, this is what I love, this is what we're doing. That's the best recruiting tool we can have. And financially, sure, I can go to the legislature, and I do, and I will, but you just heard what the financial problems are. And Alyssa is here as a student. She's our trustee. She's not a student trustee, she is a trustee of the Vermont State Colleges. And I know she would love to hear from you folks so she can report back to us as to what's going on with students and with faculty and on the campus. So I appreciate the hospitality of the last 3 days. But remember, the trustees are here. If you want to talk with us, you've got an idea, and that's what we need. So thank you, and we are here. If you want us to come back and visit, we will be here. I think it's the 19th of February for a meeting. So these are all open meetings. Even our committee meetings are open. So, pardon?
We're in Linden on the 19th.
We're in Linden, I'm sorry, across the way. But we have our meetings here, so wherever we are, feel free to come, feel free to call us, and we're here. Thank you.
Martha, thank you very much. So I'm thinking it's basically 3:15, so we're getting towards the end. The last thing I wanted to do before we ended the day, actually one thing I want to do before I get to what I wanted to do before we end the day is just to actually make a public thank you to Elaine Sobchak from the Chancellor's Office, who worked so hard to put all this on. I probably would forget if I did it again. I don't want to. Thank you. There used to be a radio announcer that some of you will remember in Montpelier. His name was Bob Ben, and his shtick was one man doing the work of 10. And I think Elaine is one woman doing the work of 10. And I really appreciate that, Elaine. So thank you. Wanted to actually just, thought about would it be possible that we could just brainstorm together on, some alternative motions on what we might consider on tuition that we might not have thought of. And if I've got it right, as I mentioned earlier, the process is the Chancellor recommends to the Finance Committee recommends to the Board. I don't think any chancellor's ever sat in a room by themselves and said, okay, what am I going to come up with? What's my recommendation going to be to the Finance Committee? It's an iterative process, and you work together with members of the Finance Committee and others and think it through, and you listen to information, and I listened to what Joe said today, and as he knows, my inclination was, and still is, towards a 2-year decision, but I think you get new information, you have to think about that. And with that caveat, that whatever we do is potential, we need to think about it between now and the time of the Finance Committee and the Board. But I could see, you could have, like on one extreme, you could say, okay, it's a 1-year decision, and we're going to have some level of increase, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that. Another would be, we've raised every year, perhaps, and I was looking at some of the information that was sent out, that we sent out from the Chancellor's Office to you. There's a NEBI publication in one of those that goes through state by state, and I tallied up for myself what the tuition changes have been at the other 2- and 4-year colleges in New England for the last 5 years. And when I looked at that, I could say, okay, well, Maine was somewhat less than us, but we were less than everybody else in New England, and the average tuition increased over 5 years. That was interesting information that I had. But some people would argue that, look, with the debt loads, as was mentioned, that Jim mentioned, that last year the students said we can't afford another dime. So some people could say, no, it's a 1-year decision, no increase. You could do a 2-year with increases both years, an increase in the first year, a level in the second year. You could do, and the reason I'm doing this is because we don't need to go through every one of these. What I'm getting to is, look, are there other ones that you think we ought to consider? That's where I'm going. So, you could do, as we discussed, a tuition increase the same for all the colleges. You could have some differential. We could do like we did last year, where we said it's 3 and you can go up to 2 for scholarships. At least that's the way I interpreted what was done last year. And some did and some didn't. Some went up further than others. So give them a little latitude. That might make sense. Joe, you mentioned that at Leslie, the board sets the rate and gives the discretion to the president to go within 1% of whatever the recommendation was going to be, and I'm guessing that normally you'd probably stick with what it was. I don't know if that is the case or not. But there are different ways we can do this, and I'm just wondering, beyond the obvious ones that I just sort of went over there, are there others that folks in the room think we ought to consider? Tim, here, take this one.
My comment in listening to you is just that we did start a trend last year with listening to and trusting that the presidents understand their institutions. So speaking for myself, I have no problem if Joe Bertolino comes in and says, I would like to do this and treat, take meteorology, for example, as a separate. I'm very open to differentiations among the presidents. I would like to have them all have at least talked about it and kind of nodded heads so that one isn't doing something radical that's going to affect the other. But I'm very open to that kind of, and it could be even a multi-year thing, in-state, out-of-state. I don't think we've had a lack of success with what we're doing, and I'm open to it.
Great. And that's a good point. Like I said, the chancellor doesn't sit in her office all by herself and think these things through, and there will be a chance to meet with the presidents about this before the Finance Committee as well. So, any others? Jeffrey?
I understand your question correctly, maybe this will relate. About a week ago, I cornered Barb as she was walking down the hallway, all peacefully until I showed up. And I told her that Senator Doyle had asked me as part of the class project to ask her to testify in front of state legislators about an idea I had. And it has to do with EB-5. So I'm going to use this time efficiently, considering that this room has some powerful people, some connected people, and I'm a transplant from Massachusetts. Ms. Murphy sent me to the Director of External and Governmental Affairs at the Chancellor's Office, where I presented my idea about getting language in a federal program, the EB-5 program, to extend the language one more sentence and allow nonprofits, specifically educational institutions, to be able to welcome international investors to be able to invest in us. My microcosm mind is focused primarily on GSC, but I welcome any of you. I have been sent by the Tricia to Chris Saunders at the Senator's office. U.S. Senator Leahy's the co-sponsor of that bill, and Chris Saunders is supposedly going to get back to me anytime we can talk, but I encourage you, there's substance, I think, behind this idea. If we can get EB-5 expanded, that opens up educational opportunities, not just for Johnson in my own little world, but I think the state of Vermont, and I believe across the country, it changes the dynamic of how you could look at investing money from external sources. So if you were talking about money and ways to get it, that's my general idea. I invite all of you to contact Senator Leahy.
I think it's definitely worth pursuing. And it's probably a complicated question, but hey, why not? Just so, since you're such a bright guy, what you will have to do in that program is convince people that it's going to create jobs and that there's a way that the investors can get paid back. So we got to figure out that connection. And if we can do that, we can probably, you know, it sounds like, hey, let's try. All right, folks. Listen, if you have any other suggestions, you know, I read my emails, jeff.spalding@vsc.edu. I really want to thank all of the board members, the presenters, the members of the audience that came today, the administration and faculty representatives, and everybody that contributed to this. I hope it's been useful. You know, I must say what I'm not shy to say what I'm hoping to the trustees is I'm hoping we can reach an accommodation that we all feel we've had a thoughtful process, and if we can't all agree on what the final proposal is, that we feel we've had a chance to have our say, and it's been a thoughtful process, and that we feel good about how the decision was made in the end, and that we're all part of the same team, and that's the goal behind this. So thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see you soon.